On the morning of January 17th, 2004, the residents of Monterrey, Mexico woke up to bizarre news. A police officer had been attacked by a witch and he was still in the hospital. This news became national news, eventually international news, with teams from many countries around the world coming there to try to investigate. And this case was perfectly documented. He gave many interviews telling his story, and a couple years later, footage of the witch that attacked him was filmed. This is the case of the Witch of Monterrey. Hi, my name is Natalie and I cover cases from Latin America ranging from true crime, urban legends, cryptids, internet mysteries, rabbit holes, and more. Like and comment for support and enjoy the video. So the police officer that we're gonna be talking about in this story, his name is Leonardo Samaniego, but I'm gonna call him Leo in this story. When this happened back in 2004, he was 23 years old and he was a relatively new cop that he had not been working as a police officer for very long. And that night he got the night shift, which started at 7 p.m. and ended at 7 a.m. And he was told to patrol this neighborhood that had a few reports of, crime and break-ins, so a dangerous area. And he was driving in the night, patrolling the neighborhood, trying to make sure that everyone was okay, when suddenly he sees a big tree. And on the tree is something really big, black, kind of like hanging from it or floating. And then the thing suddenly falls. But before the thing can reach the floor, like 2 feet before touching the floor, it completely stops and slowly floats down to the floor. He realizes that this black mass is actually a person that is wearing like a very big black cloak that has a hood with a pointy end. And then suddenly this figure turns immediately towards him. He said that it was in the most unnatural way possible. He didn't see them use their legs to turn around. It was as if they had just floated, turned immediately towards him. And he realized that it was a woman. And so this woman lifts her hand to cover herself from the headlights of his car. He's in his patrol car. It's a classic Beetle and with the number 14 on it, and he has his headlights on. And this woman is blinded by the lights, so she puts her hand in front of her face and she's trying to peek, trying to see who is in that car. And as she is speaking, he's able to see her eyes, and her eyes were not normal. He says that her eyes were completely black and had no eyelids. It was really strange because she was blinking, but she didn't have eyelids. And so he gets really scared. And he grabs his radio and calls for help. And he starts telling oh, I need help. There is this strange person here. This is my location. Send someone immediately. And as he's talking on the radio, this woman starts walking towards his car. And he cannot see any other feature from this woman because she's dressed head to toe in black. He can only see her face and that she has her hair part in the middle and it's black and it's really long, and he can only see her hands. And so she gets on the hood of the car with her hands right against the windshield, she hits it. He gets really scared. Leo gets really scared and he tries to turn on the car to get the hell out of there, but the car doesn't respond. It's not dead because the headlights are still on, but it's not responding. And the woman is hitting the windshield of the car, and he is I'm just gonna put the car on neutral so it can slide backwards. And this street was kind of in a hill, so the car, as soon as it's put on neutral, it starts going backwards, but very slowly. And the woman is still hitting the windshield, and he is terrified. And he's looking back, trying to maneuver the car to not hit anyone, to not hit anything, and then looking in front of him to see this woman inches away from his face, because classic Beetles are very small and the windshield is kind of flat in front of your face, and she's right there smacking the car. And so the car is moving backwards and it gets to a corner and he's I'm gonna turn around the corner. It just keeps sliding down this hill, and he's trying to maneuver when he looks in front of him again to look at the witch, and he notices that she's no longer in the hood of the car. She's floating above it. She's completely floating above the car, not touching it. And she was trying to reach in through his window to grab him. His window was a little bit rolled down, and her hand was going inside trying to grab him. The car is still moving. The witch is floating above the car with her hand reaching inside. So he lifts his left arm to protect himself and leans towards his right to get away from her reach, and suddenly he passes out. The next second, he's waking up. He doesn't know what happened. For him, it was an instant. For him, he was only out for like a blink, a second. And when he wakes up, the witch is no longer there. And he tries to get up, but he still has his seatbelt on, so he removes it. And he notices that he's completely wet. All of his clothes are wet, as if he had just been in the rain. And it had not rained at all that night. He didn't even have a drink next to him that could have spilled on him while he was like driving or something. There was nothing, no way to explain why his clothes were all wet. So he got out of the car and he realized that all of his clothes were also undone. His boots, the shoelaces were almost completely off. They were just hanging by the first two holes that you put them through, just hanging by those. The zippers on the side of the boots were also undone. The button and the zipper from his pants were undone. And all of the buttons in his shirt were undone, even the ones on his wrist. But he still had his bulletproof vest perfectly put on him. And he explains that it is impossible to open the buttons of his shirt while he's wearing the vest. To be able to put on a vest, you need to lock it and secure it from the front and then from the back and then from the sides. Like, it's a very tedious process. I don't know how the bulletproof vests are now, but back then he explained that you have to tie it from the front and then secure in the back and then from the sides, and it ends up being tight against your body. Eventually help arrived, and the testimony from the police officers that arrived first to where Leo was, they tell that he was in a complete panic state, that he was crying, he was uncontrollable, he was really scared, he was terrified, and that Leo actually hugged one of the officers that arrived first. And that officer tells that his uniform was also wet from when Leo hugged him, because again, his clothes were damp. And they noticed that the car that Leo was driving, his police car, had crashed against another car. They also noticed that it had on the hood and on the windshield a lot of damage, like if someone had attacked the car with a knife or something very sharp. It had scratches all over the hood, all over the windshield. Eventually also an ambulance arrives and it checks Leo to make sure that he doesn't have any wound, a concussion or something like that, but he looks fine. They also check his blood pressure, his sugar levels, he's fine. And they also perform right there in the ambulance a rapid drug test to make sure that he was not intoxicated, but it came back negative. These events happened around 3 a.m. and Leo says that they stayed there for 2 more hours while they were investigating the whole area, while he was telling them how the events happened. At 5 a.m. he was finally taken to the hospital where he had to stay for 2 days. During those 2 days he was thoroughly checked to make sure that he was fine, but they also checked him in depth to make sure that he was not intoxicated by any kind of drug or substance or even like mushrooms. They took blood samples, a total of like 7 little jars of those little bottles. They took samples of his urine, of his saliva, from his eyes, also his nose, his hair. They took samples of everything. And he says that when he arrived to the hospital after maybe like an hour or 2 that he was in the hospital, 2 black vans arrived and they were completely black, the windows completely tinted, and from those vans 8 men came out. The 8 of them were dressed in black, completely black suits and long coats. They were not using any sort of badge or anything to identify them. And one of them was dressed in a grayish color and seemed to be the boss. So they took him to a room where only that man who seemed to be the boss stayed, a doctor, and two of his other men in black, with Leo. And they asked him to get completely naked. Once he was naked, they checked all of his body, touching him, looking at him everywhere in his body, and then they just left. He said that the doctor just let it happen. The doctor didn't ask any questions. He also didn't ask any questions. And then those men took his uniform and left in those black vans, the 8 of them, 4 in each van. And when those men left, some of the officers, some of the nurses were asking like, who were they, who knows, why were they here, who called them, but no one ever explained anything. No one ever wanted to dig deeper, I guess, because they were a little bit scared. He did say that the man that talked to him, the only one who talked, spoke good Spanish, like native Spanish, and that's all the information he could get from those people. After the 2-day stay, he was allowed to leave the hospital, and he was given a week off from work, where he was able to recover even further from his strange encounter. And after that, his life went back to normal. He said that he went back to work, that he continued being an officer for another like 10 years, or a little bit more, like 15 years. He continued being a police officer, and that during his life, he never encountered another witch or another being anymore, and he lived a pretty normal life. A year and a half later, so in May of 2006, the UFO Club Monterrey were gathering in their monthly reunion to share all of their paranormal videos, from UFOs to other sorts of creatures and weird, strange things that they had been able to capture on camera. This club was founded by Diana Perla Chapa. Diana is basically a professional. She knows so much about UFOs, about different types of creatures. She has gone to Roswell, New Mexico to give speeches at this congress about UFOs. She has traveled the world to talk about her experiences. And during that time in 2006, she was there at the gathering. And this gathering was, like I said, monthly, to see what everyone had captured on camera, when suddenly she heard a lot of people making a commotion and screaming, saying that they could see something through the windows, and they were at this place that's kind of like on a mountain. So Monterrey has a lot of mountains, a lot of these very sharp peaks, and everybody could see something black floating, flying through the peaks of the mountains. And they had 2 cameras on hand, and these are the footage that you are watching right now. You can see this black object flying through the peaks of the mountains. It is flying at a very steady speed. They explained that this object never accelerated, never went slower, never changed directions. It was going on a very clear trajectory, and it was moving through areas where they explained that there was very strong winds. So much that planes avoided flying through those areas because the wind that would be carried because of the peaks of the mountains would make it just be super strong. But this item was able to fly through those areas and not even move a bit. It was consistent. In this other footage, you can see the figure a little bit more clear. It does kind of look like a witch. And Diana explains that indeed, they were all very shocked to see that the item that was floating through there looked like a witch, like classic witches from the cartoons that float on a broomstick, and have their black hoods and cloaks on. It does have that shape. And at first they thought it was completely black, but it was because it was going against the sun, so they could only see like the shadow. But eventually the figure flies in front of the mountain, and they see that it's actually reddish, a reddish, dark reddish color. And they are able to record this witch flying for around 5, almost 10 minutes. Diana explains that her club was not about faking things, that they preferred to have no footage than to have footage that could have been explained as something else. And she said that she contacted a lot of professionals that she knew to try to get an explanation to what was this thing. So she contacted someone that was a pilot that knew a lot about planes, and he said, that's not a plane. That's not someone flying on any sort of aircraft that I know. She then contacted another person who is a professional balloon maker. Those balloons are a little bit more artistic, like not just like the little red balloon that you inflate in your house. These other balloons that have like shapes, that have faces, that have bodies. She contacted one of those people who was a professional, and he said that is not a balloon. A balloon would not have been able to float in such a perfect line at such altitudes, especially there with the, like I say, like the wind currents being so strong. It could not have been a balloon. And then she contacted another person who was a professional kite maker, and he also agreed that that was not a kite. The shape was not right. He could not see it being attached to anything. With the shape that it had, it would not have been easy to control or maneuver to keep it going at such a steady trajectory. So then she called someone she knew from Chicago, and she asked, what do you think this is? And they said that it could have been a drone. Keep in mind that this happened back in 2006, so drones were not even a thing that people knew about. But they did mention that it could have been a drone, but the shape itself made it kind of difficult to explain it as that. Like even right now to this day, if I look at it, I would assume that it's some sort of balloon figure attached to a drone. But back in 2006, who could have done something like that? Diana explains in an interview that when she heard about the Witch of Monterrey for the first time, she was one of the first people who wanted to interview Leo. And she tried many times, and she was able to get an interview from him. And she was very excited because he was very fresh, and she knew how important it is to get that interview when things just happened and not let memory and other people's opinions and comments affect the story. And she says that she had it perfectly documented, everything that he explained, and to her it was not a witch. So Diana has the explanation that this being was not a witch. And she explains that Mexico is very familiar with witches. We know witches, we are used to them. It's part of our society, our culture. And she says that witches are not like that. She believed that the witch was actually an alien, a being from outer space or from another dimension. She believed that this creature had fallen from some sort of alien aircraft, and it had gone directly to Leo to investigate him, to probe him, I guess. She said that that explained the fact that she could float, that her appearance was so strange, and she said that when her club learned about the news, they wanted to press the police to let them investigate the car. She was that there has to be fingerprints in the car, because he said that she was smacking the windshield with her hands, and she was like, why was there not an investigation for fingerprints? There must have been fingerprints there. And then she asked, can we check his clothes? Because if his clothes were completely wet, they could have been radioactive. She was like, why can't we test if his clothes are radioactive or if the car itself is radioactive? To her, that's the explanation, and that was the reason why he passed out, because the energy that these beings need in order to come to this plane, to come to this earth and interact with people, it's so strong that is the reason why he passed out. And that is also the explanation why his clothes were undone. She would ask, Why would a witch want to undo his clothes? That makes no sense, and leave no marks on his body. She was like, it has to be some sort of alien abduction. He was abducted, and most likely what he experienced, like what he saw, were implanted memories on him and not really something that happened. During the years, Leo kept saying that he did not believe it was an alien, that he was sure it was a witch, he was sure it was a person, like not even like a demon or something like that. It was definitely a woman, but she was a witch. So very recently, the Discovery Channel was doing interviews in Monterrey about this phenomena, about this case, and they interviewed Leo and they interviewed Diana. And they were very interested in this case. She said that it's gonna come out in a series in the channel Expedition, I think. It is already out. They said that it was gonna come out in August. It's already September, so I guess you can watch it if you want to know more about this story. And she said that it was not the first time that they had been interviewed, and that she and Leo had ended up with different testimony, like different explanations for what happened that night. But also Leo, very recently, I think it was in 2019, he made an interview again telling his story about his encounter with a witch, and he basically says that the story is what he told. The version that I'm telling you right now is based on that telling of his, and also based on the interviews that he gave back in 2004. And I feel like nothing has changed. I feel like his story is very consistent. Maybe now with time he's less scared of it and he tells it with less emotion like he was when he was younger. But a lot of time has passed and he thankfully has not been attacked by any other witch or any other aliens. And so this is the end of the story. I did see some people connecting this story to something that happened in Flatwoods in Braxton County, West Virginia, where the Flatwoods monster appeared and scared a lot of people. And the description of that monster is very similar to how he described the witch. But I do have to admit that from his drawings, both from when it just happened to his interview that was a few years ago, I don't think it looks that much like the Flatwoods monster. But it's really strange because the Flatwoods monster was also claimed to be an alien, and this witch was also, people try to identify her as an alien as well. So it's really interesting why people keep thinking that it's an alien more than it being a witch. So this is a story. I wanted to give you guys a more paranormal case, something more scary, more spooky, since October is right around the corner, just in a few days when I'm recording this, and I wanted to give you guys a more scary story, and I feel like this one is really fun. I think that it's 100% real. I'm not gonna lie to you. I do believe that Leo was attacked by something. And when I started doing research, I was like, yeah, that's a witch, it's a witch. But then I found this interview of Diana, and where she tried to explain it as an alien, and she started talking about all the things that she knew. And I was like, I don't know anymore. Like, I guess maybe. And then I also read how this case was tied to the Flatwoods monster, which also was some sort of alien. Just really interested. I don't know why I find so many cases about aliens. I guess just because the times that we are living. But anyway, let me know what you think, if you like the video, and I'll see you guys in the next one for a more scary story.